let's start from the two dots again. We didn't really get far yesterday, so we're just going to start again. Page 56A, 56A, Ba'atzeres, which is about 7 lines from the top of the page. Page 56A, Ba'atzeres an Shavuos Oimrim Loi Helach. They would tell either the person in charge or the individuals that are receiving the breads. They would tell them this is the Helach matzah and Helach chametz. This is the matzah, and this is the chametz. And we understood that to be emphasizing that they would specifically make sure that every person got both. They got matzah and they got chametz. What was matzah? Matzah was the showbreads. What was the chametz? Again, this is on Shavuos. Everyone got also chametz. What was the chametz? This was a rare occasion in the Beis Hamikdash where people would be given chametz to eat, partake of. And this was on Shavuos because it was called the Shtei HaLechem. So everyone got both. They got matzah and they got chametz. Now, the Gemara that we're learning now is going to take a major lesson from this Mishnah in the fact that it first says matzah and then says chametz. In other words, why are we giving first matzah and only afterwards giving the person chametz, the shtei halechem? Is there reason to say that the shtei halechem, the special, unique sacrifice of Shavuos, should take precedence, and maybe that should go first? And so the Gemara is going to bring different opinions about different cases. Shabbos, Kiddush. It's going to talk about Sukkah, Leisha Basukkah, and Shachiyanu. So we've got a few cases where we have two brachas that we're not sure what to make first. And our Mishnah seems to give us clarity on what bracha you do first. We see that in the giving, you give the matzah first and then the chametz. First, you do the showbreads, and then you did the shtei halechem, the two breads of Shavuos. So the understanding is that maybe we could learn something based on our Mishnah, and therefore the Gemara is now going to bring these cases. In the case of Sukkah and Leishe Basukkah and Shachiyanu, that was a discussion a while back on page 46. And now the Gemara is bringing it again because of our Mishnah, because our Mishnah seems to have something to say about this. So let's learn it inside. Ba'atzeres oimrim lo helach. On Atzeres, he would tell him first matzah and then chametz. Itmar, it was stated in the Beis Medrash, Rav Amar Sukkah v'acher kach zman. Rav says that first you do leishev basukkah, and afterwards you do shechiyanu bracha. And Rabba Bar Bar Chana Amar, Rabba Bar Bar Chana says, Zman, first you do shechiyanu bracha, v'yacher kach sukkah, and afterwards sukkah. Now, just for theoretical purposes, who does our Mishnah sound like? Our Mishnah said first chametz, first matzah, and then chametz. First matzah, and then chametz. Which opinion does that sound like? Again, what's the reason of what's the idea in our Mishnah? Our Mishnah is, you have to understand a little deeper. The Mishnah says first you give the showbreads, and then you give the shtei halechem of Shavuos. Now, what the Mishnah is basically saying, if you look a little deeper into that, what that means is that shtei halechem is almost like off the run of the mill. You know, it's like every week we had shtei halechem. That was the regular. every week you had lechem haponim. You had the breads. That was the matzah breads. That was every week you had that. Every Shabbos they would switch the breads for the next week's breads, and that was called the lechem haponim, and that was the matzah. And then you also had the shtei alechem that was unique. Once a year you had this. Very rare to have such a thing. Chametz on the Beis Hamikdash. And you had this. It was done on Shavuos, and they would distribute that afterwards. So that's what the Mishnah says. What is that telling us? It's telling us something about the uniqueness of this day is not always first. But maybe it's never first. The showbreads came first. They were the regular run-of-the-mill. That was what's first. The shtei alechem, the uniqueness of the breads, the unique breads, that was after. So what would happen by the case of Sukkah and Shehechiyanu, which means Leishev Basukah versus Shehechiyanu? So seemingly that would imply that Shehechiyanu, which is the regular, automatic, generic bracha that happens every holiday, is similar to the lechem hapanim, similar to the showbreads. It was every week, Shehechiyanu, every holiday. So that maybe you should do first, just like our Mishnah says. And then afterwards, you do Leishev Basukah, which is unique to Sukkot, right? That's what it is. I'm just giving you like an idea of what the Gemara is going to understand from our Mishnah. So that would seem to fit with Rabba Bar Chana's statement versus Rav's. In other words, Rabba Bar Chana seems to fit his logic that first you do Zman Shehechiyanu, the regular type of thing, the Shehechiyanu, it happens very often, that you do first. Afterwards, you do the unique thing, which is the Sukkah, Leishev Basukah. The Mishnah said, first you do Lechem Hapanim, the regular stuff, and then you do the Shtei Alechem, the unique thing. So it seems to fit with Rabba Bar Chana. Again, we'll wait for the Gemara to tell us that, but I'm just giving you the way the Gemara's, the logic, the style, the way the Gemara's, the rhythm of the Gemara. This is how the Gemara's looking at this. Okay, so now comes the Gemara, and it explains the reason of Rav and Rabba Bar Chana. Why do they say their order about Leishev Basukah, the blessing of dwelling in the Sukkah, and the blessing of Shehechiyanu? Why do they say their order? So Rav says you got to do Sukkah first, Leishev Basukah, v'yachar kach, and afterwards Zman, afterwards Shehechiyanu, because Chiyuva D'Yoyma Adif. The obligation of the day is more important. It's better. And we could all relate to that. If this is something special, of course, this should be first. It's something special, right? You could understand such an idea. This is very special. Leishev Basukah, it's called the Chiyuva D'Yoyma. Now, exactly what precisely the Gemara means by this, that because it's the Chiyuva D'Yoyma, so there are different commentaries struggling to understand what that specifically means. Chiyuva D'Yoyma. It's a holiday. It's also, you could call the Shehechiyanu also Chiyuva D'Yoyma. You have to know how to precisely translate those words. Why is this called more of a Chiyuva D'Yoyma? So among the commentaries, there's a concept that Chiyuva D'Yoyma is precisely about Sukkos. That would be Leishev Basukah. The others are more generic. That would be an understand. So it's Chiyuva D'Yoyma, the unique chiyuv of this day. Now you have to sort of like add a little understanding to these words. You have to translate them more than just translate. You have to add a little understanding into what it means. Chiyuva D'Yoyma. So the tzlach wants to understand it this way, that it's the chiyuv of this day that's unique to this day is Sukkah, Leishev Basukah. Shehechiyanu is every holiday. You say Shehechiyanu. Okay, that's one understanding. Another understanding is that the chiyuva of the day, this is the obligation of the day, the active obligation. That's another way of understanding it. That this is the mitzvah to do. The mitzvah of dwelling in the sukkah is dependent on my doing. The Shehechiyanu bracha is on the holiday. It doesn't involve me doing anything. It's the holiday deserves a Shachianu. Hashem let me live to merit to be here for this holiday. So it's not, doesn't involve action. So chiyuva diyama, the obligation of doing of the day, this is my incumbent on me. This is the leishe basukah is a mitzvah that's something that I'm going to need to do. That's a chiyuva diyama. That comes first before something that's just passive. Before the holiday, the Shachianu is about the holiday, but it's not me doing anything. It's the mitzvah of the day, so to speak. So again, the first understanding was about something special about today. Here it's about the action of today, the mitzvah, the obligation of what I have to do today. And it gives a few similar ideas that in other words, that's one way of wording it. Another way of explaining it, the same commentary says additional understanding. He says that the bracha of the sukkah is not exempted, doesn't exempt you from with just saying a bracha. So this is a chiyuva diyayma. In other words, you're still going to be obligated to do something after you say the bracha. Very similar to the first point, to his earlier point, that it's you have an action that you have to do. He just words it a little differently, and then he has a third way of wording it, that when you make a bracha on the sukkah, it's clear that you're making a bracha on what you're making, on what you're reciting it on. But Shechiyanu, it's not clear from the bracha that it's specifically going on the Yom Tov. There's many things that could cause you to want to say a Shechiyanu, many mitzvahs, many other even non-mitzvahs. You have a new fruit, you have something, new clothing, there's many other things that, so it's not clear. So here's chiyuva diyayma, something that reveals the chiyuv of the day. That's better than something that's unclear. It's not clear. It's not revealing what the day is, what the uniqueness of the day is. This is the chiyuva diyayma. This is this is revealing the obligation of the day. So that's another understanding, that the mitzvah of sukkah, leishe basukah, is going to come first before the shehechiyanu bracha. And then they bring another understanding that this is a chiyuv of today, that I can only make it today. Shechiyanu bracha, you would be allowed to recite even before the holiday, about the holiday. When you build you're building the sukkah, you could recite the Shechiyanu bracha already at the time of building. So this bracha, leishe basukah, dwelling in the sukkah, is only when the holiday arrives. It's an obligation of the day. And so it's the chiyuva diyayma. This bracha leishe basukah is an obligation of this day. It's not something that could have been done beforehand. So anyway, these are the different ways of understanding the specific wording here. But the concept is that leishe basukah is much more about today than the shehechiyanu bracha. Shehechiyanu bracha is it's recited on other times. It's not clear that it's about sukkah. It doesn't have the same maybe preciseness, the specific. I don't know. It's much more. The leishe basukah is much more focusing on the holiday that we have now. It's much more clear. It's magnifying it. And so that is the reason why, according to Rav, Sukkah gets the bracha, leishe basukah goes first before you do the shehechiyanu bracha. And again, this is a practical question, because this is what our kiddush involves the first night of Sukkot. What do you say first? I mean, so it is a very practical thing. This is not just the academic ideas that we're discussing. This is a practical shiloh. When you make kiddush on Sukkot night, it is a little confusing then, actually, because there's a lot of extra brachas there's a few extra brachas you're saying. You're doing leishe basukah, you're doing shechiyanu, which one goes first? And it actually turns out that it's more confusing than you think, because actually on the second night, the common minhag is to flip it. So whatever you do the first night, you got to flip it for the second night, which is room for a lot of mistakes. It gives room for a lot of mistakes because you're looking in your machzor or your bencher, and of course it's got to say it one way, and then it's somewhere in small print it says, well, on the second night you do it this way, or basically the fact is that it's this confusion here, this argument here between Rav and Rabba bar bar Chana is something that is very practical, and it applies on the first night of Sukkot and on the second night of Sukkot. The question is if we do both the same or not. Okay, so we've got Rav saying Sukkah before Leisha B'Sukkah comes before Shechianu. Rabba bar bar Chana says that it's Zman v'yachar kach Sukkah. First you do Shechianu, and then you do Sukkah. And the reason he says that is called Tadir v'she'enai Tadir Koidim. And this is a rule that we've seen before. And this also is an understandable idea that something that's very often it takes precedence. It has a certain special blessing to it that we're able to do it often. So it takes precedence over something that only happens from time to time. And so the bracha Shechianu is more common than the bracha Leishev B'Sukkah, and it's called a Tadir v'she'enai Tadir Koidim. You have this fact that it's more often. Rashi gives this understanding that it's Noyeg B'chol Haragolim. It is accustomed. In other words, it's recited on all the holidays of Shechianu, and Leishev B'Sukkah is only recited on Sukkot. It deserves to be understood, and we mentioned this yesterday, the concept of the fact that we do say Leishev B'Sukkah much more times than we say Shechianu on holidays, because every time we go into the Sukkah and eat some cake or eat a meal, we say a Leishev B'Sukkah. Shechianu, we say a very limited amount of times. We only say Shechianu. So which one is more common to us? For us, I think we find that Leishev B'Sukkah would be more common than Shechianu. The Gemara says that the reason of Rabba bar bar Chana that Shechianu comes first is because Shechianu is more common. And the question, of course, that the commentaries struggle with is, it doesn't seem that is that much more, that it's more common. It seems like Leishev B'Sukkah might be more common. And one of the understandings is, well, first of all, you have to realize that we're not saying here what you normally do. We're talking about obligations. So some guy might buy suits every day, and he'll make a Shechianu, recite a Shechianu blessing every day. Does that mean Shechianu is more common than Leishev B'Sukkah? That wouldn't make it more common, just because he does that. But what makes something more common is if it's an obligation to do. So Shechianus you could say a lot of times, and Leishev B'Sukkah you could say a lot of times. If you love cake, and you every hour you go down and have your snack, so you would be reciting more Leishev B'Sukkahs than Shechianus. But it doesn't go by what you like and what you have not optional stuff. It goes by obligatory stuff. And obligations of reciting Shechianu and obligations of saying Leishev B'Sukkah, he's saying that you would have more obligation of saying Shechianus than Leishev B'Sukkah. It's more Tadir, because every holiday you have to recite a Shechianu. And on Sukkot, you could get away with one Leishev B'Sukkah. How would you get away with one Leishev B'Sukkah? You'd get away with one Leishev B'Sukkah if you never interrupted and you stayed in the Sukkah all the time. You would basically recite one Leishev B'Sukkah. So it's possible to say one Leishev B'Sukkah. The obligation is basically one Leishev B'Sukkah. You're dwelling in the Sukkah for 7 days. All the days you'd be dwelling in the Sukkah. And the Shechianu, you would be reciting each of the holidays. So if you have a few holidays and you only have one Leishev B'Sukkah, so automatically Shechianu is more often. And that would, and it's an obligation to say Shechianu more often. And that makes it that it would take precedence you would take precedence when you have these two brachas to recite. Okay, so we have two reasons, two explanations to the two opinions. We have the opinion of Rav that Sukkah comes first, and the explanation was that the reason is because Chiyuva de Yoima Adif, which we explained a few different ways, but it means that all after all the commentaries, the explaining what the words mean, but the concept is that Sukkah would take precedence because it's specific about the holiday of Sukkot, and Shechianu is not so specific, it's not revealed what it's about. It's different ways of explaining it, but it's basically not as specific as the Sukkah mitzvah, as the Sukkah bracha, and therefore Sukkah would come first. This is the special holiday this is a special bracha for today that would take precedence. And Rabbi Bar Bar Chana would say, no, it doesn't go by what's more unique and special for today. It goes by what is actually more often done. That's what should come first. This is the more common thing, more often thing. That's what you do first, and that would be the bracha of Shehecheyanu. So we got a machlokes here. The Gemara now asks, before it gets to our Mishnah, the Gemara now says, what about, it seems that we might have another argument that seems to go hand in hand with this debate. What's the other argument? The other argument has to do with Kiddush. When you recite Kiddush on Friday night, what bracha, there's two brachas on a Friday night of Kiddush. One bracha is on the wine. It's called Borei Pri Hagafen. And the other bracha is more of an extended bracha. It's many more words in it. It involves the sanctifying the Shabbos, Kadesh Shabbos. That bracha of Mekadesh Shabbos versus the bracha of Borei Pri Hagafen, which one should take precedence? On the one hand, Mekadesh Shabbos is much more unique for this day, Mekadesh Shabbos. On the other hand, Borei Pri Hagafen is more common. It sounds like it's a very similar idea. You got the bracha Leishe Basukah, which is unique to today. That's similar to the bracha of Mekadesh Shabbos. This Shabbos is very special. It's a unique this day. All the other days of the week don't get this, but this day is a special thing. Kiddush, we're reciting the Kiddush, the blessing of Mekadesh Shabbos. It's a special day, and it's unique. That bracha maybe should come first. On the other hand, the bracha on wine maybe should come first. Why? Not because you could drink wine all day and all night, and you'll be constantly reciting brachas on wine. Have it optionally, you could drink a lot of wine or grape juice and recite Borei Pri Hagafen, so you'd have more Borei Pri Hagafens than Kiddush. That's not the reason. It's not about optional stuff. It's about the fact that there's very often you have a obligation to recite the bracha on wine, and therefore that obligation applies more often than just Shabbos. And because of that, the wine would be called tadir, be the more often thing. So you have something that's more often, you have something that's more unique and special. So that seemingly would be a very similar argument we should think of over there. This argument, Rav and Rabbi Bar Bar Chana, seems like it would apply there as well. So let's see what it says over there. Lema Rav Rabbi Bar Bar Chana bepalukta de Beishami Beiselu Kamiflagi. So it says, let's say that Rav and Rabbi Bar Bar Chana are arguing in the same argument that Beishami and Beis Hillel argue about. The Tana Rabbanan, because it was taught in a brisa that Devarim Shabein Beishami and Beis Hillel, the things that are arguing that Beishami and Beis Hillel argue about, Besuuda, among those things that they argue about, Besuuda is this case. Beishamai says Mavarech al Hayoim v'achar kach Mavarech al Hayayin. You recite the bracha on the day, Shabbos, Mekadesh Shabbos, sanctify the day. Say that bracha first, and afterwards recite the bracha on the wine. Who does that sound like? Rav or Rabba bar bar Chana. This is Beis Shammai talking. He's talking about Kiddush. In his opinion about Kiddush sounds very similar to the one of the opinions that we mentioned about Leishe Basukah in Shechianu. What does Beis Shammai say? He says, you want to say a bracha, if you want to do the Kiddush, got to say the Kiddush first, Kadesh Shabbos, and then afterwards say the blessing on the wine. What does it sound like? Sounds like you should sanctify the day, the uniqueness of the day first, and afterwards you do something that you do on a regular day, every day or every week, So first say the bracha on the Kadesh Shabbos. That's special. That's unique. That's very similar to Rav, who said that you recite the bracha Leishe Basukah first, and afterwards you say something that's more. Afterwards you say the regular stuff, the Shechianu, that's recited many different times, and it's not unique, special for today. So that sounds like Rav. Rav sounds like he's going like Beis Shammai. Beis Shammai, of course, is a Tana. Rav is right at the beginning of the Amoyroim. Sometimes we do say Rav Tana Upalig. Rav is like a Tana because he was right in between the era when the Tanoim ended and the Tanoim began. But Rav is basically an Amoira that sometimes can argue with the Tanoim. Sometimes argues with them. But he's really an Amoira. And Rabba bar bar Chana is an Amoira. And so they're not really allowed to argue with the Tanoim. And the Gemara says that it sounds like Rav is following Beis Shammai. What's surprising about that would be that we don't normally follow Beis Shammai's opinion. We normally follow Beis Hillel. Very rarely do we follow Beis Shammai. And so the Gemara says that it sounds like Rav is saying it sounds like this is the same argument. We'll soon develop that thought. But now we do Beis Hillel's opinion. Beis Hillel says Mavarach ala yayin, recite the bracha on the wine, and afterwards you'll recite the blessing on the day, meaning the uniqueness of this day, Mekadesh Shabbos, the special blessing for the Kiddush that's about Shabbos. And that sounds, Beis Hillel sounds very similar to what Rabba bar Chana sounds like he's speaking similar to what Beis Hillel says. Why? Because Rabba bar Chana spoke about the concept of Sukkah, Leishe Basukah versus in Shechianu. And what do you do first? You do Shechianu. It's more usual, more common. So if that's why you do Shechianu, and then afterwards you do Leishe Basukah. So that seems to fit with exactly what Beis Hillel. Beis Hillel says, say the bracha on the wine. That's much more common. And then afterwards you do the thing that's unique. The Mekadesh Shabbos, the special thing for the day. Now the Gemara says, and it explains the reasons of Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. And what does it say? What's the reason? Beis Shammai mevarach ala yoim, v'yachach mevarach ala yayin. First say the bracha on the day, and afterwards say the bracha on the wine. And what's the reason? So he gives two reasons. Number one, shehayoim goyrim layayin sheyavay. You can't say the bracha on the wine first. The day is even the cause of the whole thing that wants the wine is the day. The day is what the day is what causes you to recite the bracha on the wine. Of course, you got to sanctify the day first. It's without the Shabbos day, you wouldn't be drinking this wine. This is drinking wine before a meal is not very common. It's only because what's causing you to drink the wine. It's the holiday. It's the day of Shabbos, and so because of that, it would make sense to recite the uniqueness of the day, Mekadesh Shabbos blessing before the blessing of Retiree Hagafen. So it's the yoim is goyrim layayin sheyavu. The wine, the day causes the wine to come, meaning the day causes the obligation to have wine. And also ukvar kidesh hayoim va'adayon yayin loiba. The holiday arrived. So if you look at time-wise, the holiday came, it arrived, right when the moment that it becomes night, and still the wine didn't come yet, meaning the obligation to make Kiddush and the recital of Kiddush is not going to come until afterwards. First, it's got to be night. First, it's got to be the holiday, the Shabbos day has to arrive, and then you would be reciting the Kiddush. And so if you want to go in the order of the way things happen, what comes first? What comes first is the obligation of the day, which is the kiddush of the day, and that would be arriving first, and then you would kick in the obligation to recite kiddush. And so the recital of the blessing of the wine of kiddush. So therefore, what would you recite first? First, recite the holiday, the Shabbos day kiddush, and then you would recite the blessing on the wine. What's the reason of Beis Hillel? Beis Hillel Beis Hillel says you make the bracha on the wine first, and afterwards you say the bracha on the day. And the reason Beis Hillel is shayayin gerim lekidusha shatayomer. The wine is what causes the kiddush that it's going to be recited. If you don't have wine, you don't recite this kiddush. This kiddush is the kiddush that's only recited on wine. So the wine is the only reason you're reciting this kiddush. And the second thing is, davar acher, another reason, is birchas hayayin tadira. The wine is called tadir. It's more often recited. You recite the bracha on wine more often. And because of that, because you recite the bracha on wine more often, birchas hayoim eina tadira, the blessing of kiddush, which is mekadesh Shabbos, the uniqueness of the day, that's less common. And because of that, tadir v'she'enai tadir, when you have something that's more often and something that's not so often, tadir koidem, the thing that's more often comes first. And so what comes out from this is that he clearly, Beis Hillel gives such an idea, such a reason that the blessing of wine comes before the blessing of Kiddush on Shabbos. And so now what we have here is that Rabba Bar Chana talked about the Tadir, something that's more usual, and that comes first.
Planning on showering?
That seems very clearly connected to Beis Hillel's opinion. So the Gemara says it sounds like Rabba Bar Chana fits like a perfect fit with Beis Hillel, and Rav sounds like he fits with Beis Shammai, because according to the way Rav is holding that you first recite the bracha on Leishev Basukkah before you say Shechianu, and that emphasizes the idea that the holiday blessing takes precedence in the specific holiday blessing. And then afterwards, you say the more generic thing, and it seems like that fits with Beis Shammai, that the blessing of the wine would come after the kiddush. The blessing of Shechianu comes after the sukkah. Rav holds. Blessing Shechianu comes after Leishe Basukkah. So it sounds like it could fit. It could fit nicely. Now the Gemara is not happy with saying such a thing. Why not? Because it's very strange to say that Rav would follow Beis Shammai. Beis Shammai was not the opinion that the Amoraim followed, because they knew that the halacha is following Beis Hillel, and it would be strange for them to go and paskin like Beis Shammai. So the Gemara asked it as a question: is it possible? Should we say that Rav holds like Beis Shammai? Rabba Bar Chana holds like Beis Hillel? And additionally, it's strange that Rav and Rabba Bar Chana would be arguing about something that the previous rabbis, the Tanoim, argued about, Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel, and not say that we follow that view. Instead, they're making it as if it's their own argument. That's also something the Gemara finds strange, that it wouldn't be appropriate. It's not the right way to do things. You don't just make it as if this is my argument, when it's really they're discussing earlier rabbis' arguments that maybe they might side with them, but don't take the credit yourself as if it's your argument. You got to say who you hold like. So the Gemara really does not want this to be, but it has to try to understand why is it not this way. It sounds like Rav holds like Beis Shammai and Rabba Bar Bar Chana holds like Beis Hillel. That's the Gemara's question. So the Gemara says, Lema Rav Diamar Beis Shammai. Let us say that Rav holds like Beis Shammai, but Rabba Bar Bar Chana Diamar Beis Hillel. And Rabba Bar Bar Chana is the one who follows Beis Hillel. Now that seemed to fit very nicely. Rabba Bar Bar Chana Beis Hillel. That seemed very smooth, very clear. The Tadir, they're both emphasizing Tadir, even in the reasoning. Rav and Beis Shammai, you get an idea that they're seem to be both going along a similar path. You didn't see the same wording, so it's not, maybe it wasn't a perfect fit, but it seemed very similar ideas. They seemed to be promoting similar concepts, similar ideas, similar svara. And the Gemara says, and the Gemara is going to try to break off this connection and say, no. Rav has to follow also Beis Hillel. And even Rabba Bar Bar Chana can say, my statement doesn't necessarily only go with Beis Hillel. It could even go with Beis Shammai. Of course, we don't assume he follows Beis Shammai, but his statement is not necessarily limited to Beis Hillel. It could really follow Beis Shammai as well. So the Gemara says, Amar loch Rav. Rav will tell you, Ono de Amri, I say, afilu lebeis Hillel. I could even say, what I said even follows the way Beis Hillel holds about Kiddush. Beis Hillel said his halacha about Kiddush and which bracha comes first. And so Rav says, I could follow him. In other words, the opinion of Beis Hillel is not against what I said. Why? Ad kan loy ka'amri Beis Hillel. Until now, Beis Hillel didn't say their halacha about Tadir, that Tadir always comes first, something that's more often. That's what always comes first. Beis Hillel didn't say their halacha only over there, Hasam, Ella only because Shehayayin Goyrem L'Kidusha Shetayomer, because the wine is what causes you to be reciting that whole Kiddush. That would be a reason that would be a reason that the wine comes first. And even though we said Tadir, V'she'enai Tadir, Tadir Kaidem, that's not alone enough of a reason. In addition to that reason, or maybe that was more like a side reason, an extra point, but it wasn't wasn't mentioned as a reason of its own. And really the reason of Beis Hillel would be their first point, that the wine is what's causing the Kiddush to be recited. And so the Kiddush has to acknowledge that because you have wine here, you could say this extra Kiddush. In other words, you said Kiddush in Shul, in davening, in the Shemona Esrei, you say Mekadesh Shabbos, you say that bracha. But the Kiddush at home, on a cup of wine, it's the wine that's causing you to recite that extra Kiddush. And that Kiddush is based on the wine. So because the wine is what's causing it, that's why you're going to be reciting the Kiddush on wine. But when it comes to the issue of Leishev Basukkah versus Shechianu, there, everyone, even Beis Hillel, would agree with me that the bracha, even Beis Hillel would follow possibly what I say, that the bracha would be Leishev Basukkah first, Leishev Basukkah, even though the other bracha is more Tadir, the bracha Shechianu is more often, because you don't have this concept of one causing the other to be recited. And therefore, there's reason to say that maybe Sukkah should be recited first. And so what Rav is basically saying is that Beis Hillel, their main reason is the wine causes the Kiddush to be recited. And that's why the wine comes first. Now, there is another way of understanding this, and I'll tell you what I'm the reason it's why do we need to explain this better? The reason we need to explain this better is because if you look in the wording of the brisa that we brought, where we have this argument of Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel, if you look at the wording, the brisa spells out that the reason of Beis Hillel is Tadir v'she'enai Tadir Tadir Kaida. So he seems to be very clear that that's his reason. So how could Rav come along and say, no, your reason is that the yayin is garim l'kiddush? Yeah, that's one of that's one option. But he also says this other reason of Tadir v'she'enai Tadir. And the Brisa seems to spell it out that there's two reasons. So Tosfos asks this question. He says, how could the Gemara come up with this? Rav clearly doesn't agree with this Tadir v'she'enai Tadir concept in this type of a scenario. He clearly doesn't hold of it. His case is the Shechianu and Leisha Basukkah. He just says Leisha Basukkah first. So Rav seems very clear. He's not worried about this Tadir concept. And the Beis Hillel says very clearly Tadir v'she'enai Tadir. And so Tosfos is bothered with this. This is the top Tosfos over here. And Tosfos says that when Beis Hillel says their reason of Tadir, they didn't mean it that it's a reason in its own right. Tosfos says, Loi mitam zel l'chudei koidemes l'chivas hayoim. That's the wording of Tosfos. Not because of this reason alone does it make it come first. That we should say, that according to this, you should say Shechianu before Leisha Basukkah. That reason alone is not enough. He means in combination with the other reason, then we'll also take Tadir into consideration. That's one point that's one understanding the way Tosfos says it. But Tosfos adds another option. And Tosfos, which seems like maybe Tosfos is not satisfied with that. And probably the reason is because the Gemara, the Brisa says davar acher. The Brisa says alternatively as if it's a separate reason, not a combination reason. And so, but Tosfos doesn't say why he's giving an additional reason. Tosfos just says, and maybe the Gemara doesn't mean to argue with and change the simple understanding of the Brisa. Maybe the Gemara understands the Brisa clearly, that the Brisa means they're two totally separate reasons. But all Rav is saying is that the halacha in regarding Kiddush, Rav would agree with. That Rav, it's not explaining how Rav could fit with Beis Hillel, because he can't. Beis Hillel clearly says a reason of, no, he's not saying the reasons would be the same, but he's saying, I would still agree with Beis Hillel's halacha. I could still agree with Beis Hillel's halacha. It's not like I'm paskening like Beis Shammai. I could still fit with his halacha, not the same reason, because Beis Hillel does mention the reason of Tadir, but I would still fit with his halacha because of this other point. The yayin is garim l'kiddusha, that the wine is what's causing the kiddush to be recited. If you didn't have a cup of wine, you couldn't say that kiddush. That kiddush is recited because you have a cup of wine. You could say this kiddush, and therefore the wine would come first, taka with kiddush. I hold the different thing about Shechianu and Leisha Basukkah, but with Chiyuva the the specialness, the uniqueness of the day is gonna come first. But Kiddush, wine versus Mekadesh Shabbos, wine comes first. The ayin is goyrem l'kiddusha. The wine is what's causing the Kiddush, and therefore my halacha would follow Beis Hillel. Okay. Now that is the first half of this. I didn't finish the word actually reading it inside. Let me just finish. The yayin is garim l'kedusha shetiyomer. Aval hacha. Let me tell you where we are. Aval hacha. We are like right in the middle of the page. It must be about 22 lines from the bottom. That's my guess. 22 lines from the bottom. Aval hacha, but here regarding Sukkah, the question of what comes first, Shachiyanu bracha or Leishe Basukkah bracha. So you don't have that idea that one causes the other. Ilav's man, if you don't have a Shachiyanu, if you don't say the Shachiyanu, so mi lo yamrin on Sukkah, you're not going to say Leishe Basukkah. You have the holiday of Sukkot. And throughout Sukkot, you're saying Leishe Basukkah when you need to, and you don't say Shachiyanu. So one does not cause the other one. Kiddush, the wine causes the Kiddush to be recited. So there, you're going to say wine first. Here, one is not dependent on the other, and therefore, I'm going to say you do Sukkah first. Why? You're going to tell me, oh, the Zman causes Sukkah to be recited. The Shachiyanu bracha causes the Leishe Basukkah to be recited. That's not true. The Shachiyanu bracha does not cause the Leishe Basukkah. Even if you don't say the Shachiyanu bracha, you still say Leishe Basukkah. And the biggest proof is that if you leave your Sukkah and you come back, do you say Shachiyanu again? No, but you do say Leishe Basukkah. So you do say Leishe Basukkah without the Shachiyanu bracha. So one is not dependent on the other. Because it's not a dependent, therefore each one is judged. Is not you don't recite one bracha first because the other one is dependent on it. No, each one we got to judge which one to say first. And one is not dependent on the other. So now you got to judge. I think the Sukkah should come first because Sukkah is the chayvas hayoim, the chiyuva diyoima adif. This is the specialness, the uniqueness of this day. It's Sukkah. We're emphasizing the specific holiday that we're in. It's a holiday of Sukkah. Leishe Basukkah should come first. That is Rab's way of explaining it. Now comes Rabba bar Chana, and the Gemara says that Rabba bar Chana Amar Lach, Rabba bar Chana can tell you, Ana diamri afilu lebeis Shammai. I could say, even according to Beis Shammai. What does he mean? Rabba bar Chana had said that you got to go by Tadir. Now, that was Rabba bar Chana's statement. Rabba bar Chana said first Shachiyanu and then Sukkah because Tadir v'sheinu Tadir Kaidim. And that, of course, fit with Beis Hillel, said Tadir v'sheinu Tadir Kaidim. And it seems that he was arguing that he would be arguing, so to speak, with Beis Shammai, like he doesn't fit with Beis Shammai. So now the Gemara is going to try to reconcile that and say, no, he could still fit with Beis Shammai. Ad kan lo amri Beis Shammai hasam. Until now, Beis Shammai didn't hold their law, didn't teach their law only over there by Kiddush. And by Kiddush, you first say Kiddush, and afterwards you would say the bracha on the wine. Why does Beis Shammai say that? That doesn't seem to fit with my logic of Tadir v'sheinu Tadir, things that are more common. The Gemara says, he only says it there, Ela shahayoim goyrim leyayin sheyavoy. His reason over there is that the day is what causes the wine to come. Really, Beis Shammai would agree to recite the bracha on the wine first. Because Tadir v'sheinu Tadir Kaidim, really Beis Shammai holds of Tadir. You go by what's more usual, you say that first. But the only thing is, here you have a question of something causing the other thing. The day of Shabbos is what's causing the wine to come. That's what's causing you to make the Kiddush, is because of this holiness of the day. So the holiness of the day is bringing out, is the reason why you're reciting Kiddush in the first place. Aval hacha, but here by Sukkah, ilav Sukkah milo yamrinan zman. If we wouldn't have a leishe basukkah, we wouldn't be dwelling in the Sukkah, wouldn't we still need to say Shachiyanu for the holiday? So even without the actual Sukkah, you still need to say Shachiyanu for the holiday, and therefore the bracha on the Shachiyanu would come first. Here you have the Tadir. Over there, when it came to Kiddush, you also had a tadir, but the problem is one thing caused the other thing. And the way the Gemara is understanding it is that the day causes the wine to come. In other words, they're looking at the bracha of Makadesh HaShabbos as if it's a day. It's not about the wording of Kiddush, that Kiddush. It's about the blessing on that on the holiday of Shabbos, the specialness of Shabbos. That bracha, which is emphasizing the specialness of Shabbos, that's what's causing the wine. That's what's causing you to make Kiddush. So if that's what's causing you to make Kiddush, so therefore the day, this is not similar to a Shachianu bracha. The day is what's causing you. The Shachianu bracha is not what's causing you, even without the Shachianu. You would still, even without a Sukkah, you would still say the bracha of, even without the Sukkah, you would still say the bracha of Shachianu. So that is the understanding of how these opinions are not dependent one on the other. So let's just go over this final point again. So what did Beis Shammai said? Beis Shammai said that you say the bracha Makadesh Shabbos first, and only afterwards do you say the bracha on the wine. Now that is going against the rule of Tadir Rishenu Tadir Tadir Kaidim. And the Gemara said that sounds like Rabbi Bar Chana is following Beis Hillel, and that won't follow this because Rabbi Bar Chana follows that law of Tadir Rishenu Tadir, something that's more often. Sounds like he doesn't follow this idea of Beis Shammai. The Gemara answers that no, Beis Shammai is going against the rule of Tadir because one thing causes the other thing. The day is what's causing the wine. You're right, wine is more Tadir, but the day, the holiday of Shabbos, the specialness of Shabbos is what's causing you to say the bracha. So therefore, here we're going to go against the rule of Tadir because we have to first say what's the main cause of the other bracha, which is Shabbos. So first we'll say Mekadesh Shabbos, then we'll say the bracha on the wine. Now, if you want to compare that to Sukkah, how would you do that? There's no comparison to Sukkah. And therefore, even Beis Shammai will follow what I say about Sukkah, that you go by Tadir. Meaning that you'll say Shachianu first before Sukkah. What are you going to tell me? That the Sukkah causes the Shachianu? Is that what you want to tell me? And therefore, you need to therefore the Sukkah should come first. Do you think Beis Shammai holds that? And because the Sukkah is not causing the Shachianu. Ilav Sukkah milay yamrinan zman. If not for the Sukkah, would you not say a Shachianu bracha? You would still say a Shachianu bracha. Like for example, someone who's exempt from a Sukkah, they'll still say a Shachianu for Yontif. So the bracha of Sukkah is not the cause of the Shachianu. So here you have all the reason to go by the rule of Tadir. By Shabbos, you could come up with some excuse, so to speak, why not to go by the rule of Tadir? Because the bracha is dependent, the wine bracha is dependent on the other bracha, and therefore the other bracha is about the holiday. That's what causing the wine. Here, if not for the Sukkah, you'll still say the Zman. The Shachianu is not based on the Sukkah. The Shachianu is based on the fact that it's a holiday. And the Leishe Basukah is not the blessing about the holiday. Leishe Basukah is specifically dwelling in the Sukkah. So that's not what's causing the Zman. The Zman bracha, the Shachianu bracha, is about the holiday. And therefore, you would say the Shachianu first, according to Rabbi Bar Chana, because it's Tadir V'Shein Tadir. Even Beis Shammai would agree with him. That's the conclusion of this little point here. Now comes what I mentioned earlier from our Mishnah. Now, this whole idea that do we look at the thing that comes more often, or do we look at the uniqueness of the day? On the one hand, uniqueness of a day is a very powerful idea. This is something special. Well, that's what you want to do first, right? It's a special thing. On the other hand, there's a concept that something that happens more often, it gets some type of precedence, tadir. So in the Mishnah, what did we see when you have both breads? You have a matzah bread called the showbread, lechem apanim, and you have the chametz bread called the shtei alechem, the two breads of Shavuos. and they're both being distributed, and we want to know which one would you distribute first? Which one would you be giving to the Koyanim? If it was given out to the Koyanim, which one would the Koyanim get first? So what did the Mishnah say? What was the wording of the Mishnah? If you look back in the Mishnah, 56a, so the Mishnah said that you say Halach, the Mishnah is the Mishnah on 55b. The Mishnah said, Halach matzah, halach chametz. Here is the matzah, here is the chametz. It's the Mishnah on 55b. On the bottom, it's the third line of the Mishnah. It says, Halach matzah, halach chametz. Here is the matzah, here is the chametz. It sounds like they're giving the matzah first, which means the thing that was given every single week, the more tadir thing, the thing that was more often, that's what you give first. That's called the lechem hapanim, the showbread. And then you have the chametz, which was once a year on Shavuos. They had chametz that was distributed to the koyanim. It was called the shtei alechem. That was afterwards. So what do you do first? It sounds like tadir always goes first. And who would this fit better with? This seems to fit with Rabba bar bar Chana instead of Rav. Rav didn't seem to follow this idea of tadir. Rav said you to say the bracha on the Sukkah first, and afterwards you say the bracha Shechianu. He seemed to go like this idea that you have to celebrate the thing, the uniqueness of the holiday first. That's what takes precedence. So Rav doesn't seem to fit with our Mishnah. So now comes the Gemara and asks this question. Tanan, we learned in our Mishnah on 55b that it said Batzeres on Shavuos, when you have two types of breads that you're going to distribute. You tell the person either who you're giving it to, the kohen that you're giving it to, or to the person who's dividing it to the kohenim. Different opinions of how to translate it, but Omer Lai, he tells him, Halach matzah, here is the matzah, the showbread, the halach chametz, and here is the chametz afterwards. You say, here is the chametz bread, the two breads of Shavuos. V'hahachan, here, the chametz ikr, that the uniqueness of the day is the chametz, the two breads, umatzah, tafel, and the matzah is really secondary. The chametz is the main thing. The matzah is secondary because it's the bread from last week, and now it's just the time that it's eaten. And yet, ukatani, and nevertheless, even though the chametz is like the main thing now, the matzah we already did the service with, and it was on the table for a week already. So it's big avodah was really done with it already. What's the, and nevertheless, even though the chametz is the main thing, what do we do first? Halach matzah. First do the matzah, the usual thing. The halach chametz, and then only afterwards, halach chametz, here's the chametz. To Yuvta de Rav, this seems like it proves Rav wrong. So the Gemara answers that Amar Lach Rav will tell you Tanoi. It's really a machlokes Tanoim. So we sort of proved Rav wrong because the Mishnah seems to say clearly that you go by Tadir, V'sheinoi Tadir. The Gemara answers that Rav could answer you that really is a machlokes Tanoim. The Tanya, because it was taught in a brisa, Halach Matzah, Halach Chametz, that it was taught in a brisa that first is the matzah, and then is the chametz, like our Mishnah said. Abba Shol says, Halach chametz, halach matzah, first the chametz and then the matzah, and that would be the way Rav would seem to follow. And we see that there's an opinion in the Tanoim that also say that. So Rav could say that you don't have a proof against me from the Mishnah because I hold like Abba Shol that they actually would give the chametz first and only then the matzah, and that would fit with my way of thinking with regard to the bracha sukkah versus leisha basukkah versus the shechianu bracha. It would fit with my way of thinking. We're going to stop here. Sei gesund, everyone.
Wait, Rebbe, let me ask this. You were saying before that if you're not in the sukkah, you would still have a chiyuv of saying shechianu.
Yep.
However, if you're not in a sukkah, you wouldn't be able to drink the wine.
Well, not necessarily so. If someone's sick, if it's raining, you know, your person, your Isaac
But if you're
mitzvah.
not, if you're well and you're
Oh,
making kiddush,
uh-huh.
you wouldn't be able to say drink the wine without the shechiyanu.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. That's
Now
an
you have to say
interesting.
the Leisha Basukah. Sorry.
Huh.
You have to say a Leisha Basukah in order to drink the wine.
Right. Right.
That's
But
one
you wouldn't.
question.
Right. But 1 second, let me answer. But you could say the shachiyanu like we do on Yom Kippur, that you don't even drink wine and you just say a bracha shachiyanu. And seemingly that's what a person would do if they're, let's say, on an IV. Would they say a shachiyanu for yantiv? And what do women do? They don't drink wine and they light candles. You know.
Right.
So yeah. So l'chayra, the shachiyanu is not dependent on the sukkah.
My other question is regarding Shabbos.
Yeah.
Friday night, forget about the Yom HaShishi. We make Bari Priya Gofen, and then we get into the bracha for Shabbos.
Kadesh Shabbos.
Right. Shabbos day, I don't think we're
Different
making
story.
a bracha for Shabbos.
Right.
But
We're
we
not.
end with Bari Priya Gofen.
Right. It's only one bracha on Shabbos day. It's
Ah,
Rabbanan.
so there is no Mekadesh Shabbos
No,
involved at all.
not at all.
Shkoyach.
Okay. Zygazont, everyone.
Thank you,
Wonderful.
Rabbi.
Thank you,
Good
Rabbi.
night.